Pauline, thank you so much for coming on again. Literally since we had you on last, which was 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. From the minute you walked out of the door, I think we were like, we've got to get her on again. And your episode has been so popular and really useful as well. And I think people just love to hear about how they can make changes in their lives to be healthier and happier. So we're very, very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So we thought we would talk today about nutrition and well-being and mental health, chronic illness, how our sort of diets and how we're eating looks today for the general public. So I thought we could start off by talking a little bit about what our current food environment actually is.
Yes.
And what are you commonly seeing in people's diets and their lifestyles that, in your opinion, are causing harm?
Well, thank you for having me on. It's such a pleasure being back here. That's a really interesting question because our food environment has changed hugely just in the last 40, 50 years. And our lifestyles have changed a lot. You know, we're all really busy. We're all juggling multiple things. We're all under so much more pressure to earn money, to pay for more, to pay for rising food costs, to pay for rising rent and mortgages. So we're under extreme pressure to multitask and multi-juggle, and that is having an impact on our food choices. And it's certainly been taken advantage of by food manufacturers. So food is being produced cheaper, more palatable, let's say. So food manufacturers spend an awful lot of time and money formulating foods to make them tap into a very ancient system in our brain that's really a survival system. It's our dopamine system, our reward and pleasure system. And this is very well known by scientists. So it's tapped into by the food industry to make these foods highly palatable and highly rewarding when we eat them. So even with our best intentions, when we finish work and we're like, okay, I'm going to make something from scratch. I'm doing it tonight. I've got the veg in. I've got everything in the fridge. It'll only take me 10 minutes. We walk past a convenience store. We only have to smell certain things that will trigger us, or even the thought of a takeaway starts to produce dopamine in our brain. And then before we know it, we've bought what we were trying to avoid, and we're home and we're eating because we just want that instant feeling of pleasure, reward. I can relax, I can sit down and just eat without the thought of having to cook myself. So the food environment's become... it's produced, it's laid out for us the solution to our pain, but actually what it's doing is perpetuating a great deal of pain to us as humans, pain through depression, chronic illness, upsetting our gut health, digestive health. It's really driving a great deal of the chronic illness we see in our modern society.
I suppose it's cyclical because, you know, if you're feeling that way, then you do tend to go for the dopamine-rich foods.
Totally. Well, the dopamine system's really interesting. So what is the dopamine system? Dopamine's a brain hormone, and it's produced to encourage us as humans to undertake certain behaviors. So as hunter-gatherers, we would have wanted this reward hormone when our brain wants us to do something. So it's produced when we have sex, it's produced when we eat, it's produced when we're learning, when we're going out and we're wandering. It's a neuroassociation hormone. So let's say we're wandering around and we're looking, we're hunting out food and we see a bush full of delicious berries. We eat those berries and our dopamine system starts to go up, and we're producing dopamine, and the brain's like, this tastes good. Remember this. So there's a neuroassociation with this tastes really good, and there's a pleasurable experience with that dopamine. Now, as dopamine starts to come down, it's experienced as a pain by the brain. And it's not a physical pain, it's a wanting. It's a need for more. But it's not uncomfortable enough to make us like devour the entire bush full of berries, but it's just like I could do with more of that. So the brain produces dopamine in order to drive certain behaviors. Now, the problem comes when our dopamine system is stimulated into extraordinarily high levels, and that happens through drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, food, gaming, pornography, phone use. So all of these things that stimulate our dopamine system. There's a wonderful book called Dopamine Nation written by Anne Lembeck, and she calls it drowning in dopamine. So we would have been looking for things that stimulate our dopamine system as hunter-gatherers. Now we get so much dopamine from the foods we're eating, from binge watching Netflix, all of these activities that just send our dopamine system sky high, that when we get that peak and it starts to have that sharp descent, our brain just can't handle that. And so it goes, no, I need more. So that saying of once you pop, you can't stop is so true. You eat one Jaffa cake and you're like, how did I just eat the whole box? That's not because you're greedy. It's your dopamine system going, ow, I don't like this coming down. Same with alcohol. You have one glass, then you're chasing the next and the next. And so the more our dopamine system is stimulated, the more we need it to be stimulated to get that same pleasure.
Wow.
And that is a problem, actually, because then we don't get the joy in all of the other things that would have naturally given us dopamine hits, like going for a walk, like connecting, like having a bowl of Greek yogurt and fresh blueberries. It doesn't come close to hitting the mark anymore. And so kids who are gaming all night through to the morning, and they're maybe going to school, they're maybe not, they're just not getting pleasure in anything outside of just that gaming. And it's the same with alcohol, food addiction, which isn't clinically recognized, but it should be, because it's exactly the same pathway as drugs, alcohol, and other addictive tendencies. Yeah,
it's fascinating, the gaming thing. Obviously, being the father of 2 teenage boys who like gaming a lot, I do see it. Like, for example, like just that feeling of being in static time, like not having anything to do, not having that stimulation, and how difficult that is for children now. Like, and then it's like, can I have a snack? It's straight to like, it is. Can I eat
more
toast?
Dopamine.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And it's called dopamine-seeking behavior.
Really?
Yeah. So there's this term, and if we're low in dopamine, and that can come through our diet as well as lifestyle habits. So we need certain building blocks for dopamine. We need tyrosine, which is an amino acid that we find in fish and meat and eggs and almonds and pumpkin seeds. We need vitamin D. So you can imagine the impact of the weather in the UK. If someone's not supplementing vitamin D, making dopamine themselves can be really challenging. So it's not a coincidence in the winter, like, I need more. I want sugar. I want stimulants. I want something that's going to make me instantly feel really good. We need vitamin C. We need B vitamins. So our body has these raw ingredients it needs to make dopamine. And so if we're low in dopamine, we're instantly looking for things that are going to give us the hit, the alcohol, the sugar. And it's such an easy, if there's a cream egg sat in the fridge, it's going to sit there and call you. We've all been there. If it's in the house, you're already producing dopamine because you know it's there. And when you have a real addiction, or if you have a real issue with foods, and I was addicted to Percy pigs. I mean, me and Percy go way back. I was the person
Good choice,
coming home from Marks and Spencer's with Percy in the back seat deliberately, and I'd have my arm rifling around trying to find that bag of Percy pigs. And that shows the true meaning of, all your brain can think about is, when am I going to get to eat that sweet sugary hit and give my brain that hit of dopamine that it's so desperately calling for?
Yeah. I mean, when you just said cream egg, my mouth started watering immediately, which is crazy.
Fantasizing, did you?
Yeah. Well, it's just like a chemical reaction.
It is.
And we talk about dopamine a lot, and it's kind of a bit of a buzzword nowadays. And, we talk a lot about people with ADHD and how they need dopamine and stuff like that. But I don't know if people really know the ins and outs of what dopamine actually is, what it does, what causes us to need it or want it. In terms of food, we've sort of touched on the obvious ones, the Pringles and the cream eggs and the Jaffa cakes and stuff. But what other foods are there out there that people might not necessarily know are also causing this effect?
That's a great question, because you think of the sugary Haribos and cream eggs and things that you'd think would rise your dopamine levels to that level. Anything that causes a high blood sugar spike is going to impact your dopamine. And the quicker and the higher, the more dopamine is going to be released. So even things like takeaway food with MSG in it, foods with maltodextrose, which is a type of sugar that really spikes your blood sugars. So these fast foods, junk food, ultra-processed foods, they have these hidden ingredients in that are designed specifically to spike your blood sugars. There's a formulation, the perfect formulation of salt, sugar, and fat that the brain just lights up like a Christmas tree when we take it. And what's really interesting, so I went to a functional medicine symposium about 7 years ago now, over in San Francisco, and there was a speaker there who was talking about food addiction, and she said Doritos, they've got the perfect formula for addictiveness. The one thing they were missing was the gambling element, because that spikes your dopamine even more. So they've got all of the right ingredients to get your dopamine system lighting up. So they thought, what can we do to add even more dopamine to the mix to make this food even more addictive? So they created the hot chip, and it was the roulette hot chip. And so they created this packet of Doritos where 1 in every 10 was really fiery hot, and the rest were just hot. And so you were always anticipating when you were dipping in, is this going to be the hot one? Is this going to be the hot one? So your dopamine system was, again, just going up, up, up with that element of gamble. And that's how cynical the food system is when it comes to tapping into our brain chemistry and making sure we are consumers for life.
That is so depressing, isn't it?
It is.
It's so depressing.
I mean, you could say it's amazing marketing, but at the same time, it's very, very horrible.
The people that are working in these industries aren't nutritionists necessarily; they're marketers and people that are really clever at getting us to do stuff like that, right?
And this is where having an awareness, and I think it's really challenging for people because there's so many women I work with who think that they have no willpower. You know, they come to me with their hormonal problems and they're like, Pauline, I just have no willpower. I say to myself, I'm going to stay away from X, Y, and Z. And a day later, I'm back on it. And I'm saying to them, it's not down to your willpower. There's an extremely powerful force going on inside your brain, screaming at you to eat like your life depends on it. And that comes with eating in a certain way that's really synonymous with modern life. And that's, we end up being something called insulin resistant. And that's a huge precursor to chronic illness. But when we're insulin resistant, our brain is literally starving. So it's not getting the fuel. So we're constantly, our brain's like, eat all the time, even though you're eating all the time, your brain's not being fueled correctly. And that's driving a huge amount of problems. And then there's the dopamine, you know, they're constantly trying to get that next dopamine hit. So when we start to resensitize our dopamine system, it's incredibly powerful because all of a sudden food starts to taste great. Broccoli tastes amazing. And an egg tastes like, oh, this egg's never tasted so good. Whereas before, they didn't come close to hitting the spot. I saw a really interesting series last month called Alone. And it's basically where they took these really adventurous, amazing contestants from America, and they dropped them in the Arctic Circle. And they were like, right, you've got 10 items to take with you to survive, and whoever survives the longest wins $500,000. And so they took their 10 items like a shovel and an axe and tarp. I mean, we're talking the most basic, a bow and arrow, the most basic tools to survive. And the conditions were so extreme. But what I found so interesting as a social experiment was how connected they became with their food again.
Oh, really?
How when they had to hunt and find food in these extreme conditions, when their traps and their trap lines were catching rabbits or squirrels or mice, in some cases they were eating anything they could eat, they were so grateful. They were so thankful for that rabbit, the life of that rabbit.
Yeah.
And the pleasure on their face when they ate rabbit boiled in water, like a rabbit stew or fire-cooked squirrel, it really helped me to bring back the sense of we've become so disconnected with our food. And it's so readily available to us that the only time we'll truly appreciate food, I believe, is when we really need food. And if you've ever been in that situation where you're so hungry, when you're that hungry, all you can think about is food, like nothing else matters. And then when you taste it, you're like, oh my God, that tasted amazing. And that's your dopamine system becoming resensitized. So one of the guys on that series, he went out there to detox. He went out to come off alcohol, drugs. He didn't go into detail about what he was detoxing, but he knew by putting himself in that environment, he would resensitize his dopamine system. He didn't talk about it in this way, but he would allow his brain chemistry to become more balanced again. And he'd find the joy and the pleasure in survival, hunting, food, connection to nature again, being under the stars and feeling so small in this huge expanse of space.
And were they dropped down on their own, or were they part of a small group?
They were on, and they had a camera.
It was called
and just themselves. It's a great question, because you think there's going to be a camera crew there. There's a medical team and safety. They are literally on their own with about 5 different types of cameras. They've got the selfie stick, and then they've got the fixed cameras, and they're doing these video diaries, and they are suffering, and yet you can just see how they're reconnecting with themselves and with nature at the same time, and having this newfound respect for nature, which I feel if we start to reconnect with our food and understand the food system, it helps us to understand ourselves a bit better and what that food is doing to us. Food is not just fuel, it builds us, it makes us, it makes our brain chemistry, it makes every single cell in our body. So I'm a nutritionist, I would say this, but one of the most important decisions you make on a daily basis is the decision of what you're going to eat.
That's so true. Okay, so let's talk about mental health and how specifically food impacts your mental health. Now, we obviously have the obvious ways that food impacts our mental health, but how much of an impact really does the food you're eating on a day-to-day basis? So if, for example, I go home tonight and I eat a takeaway, right? How much is that going to affect my mental health on that one-off occasion? Yeah. And is it a compounded effect, or slipping up every so often, is that going to massively, impact my mental health, my well-being? How does it all work?
That's such a good question, because I think there are 2 camps here. There's the camp where food addiction for someone has been a real issue. And so for them, they just can't go back. They can't go back to it's Friday night, I'm going to have a bag of Doritos and some Maltesers, because that's like opening the door back to that, that welcoming that drug back into your life. Then there's the camp of the majority of people who have had their dopamine systems really sensitized. They're loving real food, vegetables, berries, meat. And having a takeaway on a Friday night's not going to have, it's not going to have anywhere like the same impact on your brain health, your mental health. It might impact your sleep that night. If you're having, a few drinks with that takeaway, it's going to impact your sleep that night. You might even feel a bit low and depressed the next morning if you've had a binge drinking session, let's say, because alcohol is a depressant. And alcohol tends to have more of an impact on women as we go through perimenopause and beyond than it does, particularly in our younger years, in our 20s and 30s, we can tolerate it a bit more. So there's a little bit of context to be had, but if you're having, the 80% of the time you're doing really well and 20% you're kind of veering off and socializing and enjoying a meal out and a glass of wine with friends, that's a really important part of connecting and enjoying life. There's a really big difference between that and feeling like you're a slave to the food you're consuming. And the problem comes, food can absolutely impact our mental health in a number of ways. Firstly, via our gut microbiome. Our gut is just an incredibly important area that houses all these microbes, and it can be a really beneficial, it is really beneficial, but when it becomes a source of inflammation, it can be really negative to our mental well-being. And inflammation, interestingly, stops the brain producing serotonin and dopamine in the levels it should be producing. So if you're inflamed, so this is where major mood disorders, anywhere from having mild depression or anxiety right through to, really serious depression and bipolar, if you're in a state of inflammation, and that can be driven through diet, it can be driven through poor lifestyle habits, poor sleep, chronic stress, then that inflammatory soup that your brain is sat in is impacting your brain's ability to produce serotonin, which is your happy hormone, dopamine, which is your motivation and your feel-good hormone. So then you go out after these dopamine-seeking behaviors. You then turn to alcohol or cigarettes or junk food, gaming, pornography, all of these things that are unnaturally going to spike your dopamine. And that's then perpetuating the inflammatory state. So it can really start off like a small little downward spiral that can quickly become quite a large downward spiral. So that inflammatory state is really an area that can really impact mental well-being. The other is insulin resistance, and I touched on this earlier. So insulin resistance is incredibly common. It's the sort of, think of it as like a pre-diabetic state, but it's a spectrum. So we don't just go from being really healthy into diabetic. And when I say diabetic, I mean type 2, not type 1, which is more of an autoimmune condition. So pre-diabetes or insulin resistance, when we eat any food, let's say we eat a bowl of pasta with some lovely bolognese sauce and a bit of cheese on top, our blood sugars start to rise up. And our body, our very clever pancreas produces insulin to take that blood sugar out of the bloodstream and introduce it into the cells in the brain and the muscles, all around the body, and say, here you go, cells, use this glucose to make energy. Now, if we are constantly spiking those blood sugars and we're like, oh, I'm just waking up, I'm having cereal, then I'm having a biscuit an hour later, then I'm having a panini, and then I'm having all of these blood sugar spiking foods because we're needing that stimulation, we're needing the dopamine all the time, then over time, the insulin starts to be like, listen, I can't get this blood glucose into the cells as easily anymore. It's getting harder. The cells are getting resistant. They're like, stop introducing all this blood sugar to me. You know, I'm full. I don't want more glucose. And so the body's like, well, we got to get rid of it. It's toxic to have high blood sugars in your body. So the pancreas dutifully produces more insulin. And so the insulin goes up. So the body's like really trying to get this glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells. And because that insulin, that blood sugar has to go somewhere, it gets stored as fat. It gets stored as fat in the liver, which is why non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is just going up and up and up, and in children as well. And it gets stored as body fat. All the meanwhile, the cells start to become hungry for fuel. So our insulin-resistant brain is like, I can't focus, I'm brain fogged, I'm irritable, I'm hungry. So the insulin-resistant brain looks like, feed me all the time, even though you're constantly eating to try and get that, to satisfy the brain. The brain is craving protein, amino acids, and it absolutely needs essential fatty acids, which are the intelligent fats we find in oily fish and hemp and linseed and all of these lovely omega-3 rich foods. So we find that this insulin-resistant state has a huge impact on testosterone and has a huge impact on our female hormone health as well. Now, testosterone is a really important hormone for men, for mental well-being, for confidence, for feeling buoyant, for feeling good. And when testosterone plummets, depression in men is rife. And it's a really big problem at the moment in men's health. And the same with women. Insulin resistance is already associated with perimenopause just because of our changing female hormones. We are more prone to insulin resistance. So if we've already spent our 20s and 30s upsetting our metabolic health, we get to perimenopause and it's like, well, you know what hits the fan.
Wow. And so in terms of these blood sugar spikes, now, what food are we talking spikes the blood sugars? Is it the same if I'm eating like a piece of toast versus some eggs? Or what if I'm eating eggs and toast with vegetables? Is that different to just having a toast with honey, for example? What can we do to sort of stop
it's a
that?
good question because there's an element of personalization in that question. So if we were to feed a 15-year-old boy who's playing football all day, bananas and toast and honey and a big bowl of porridge after, the impact on his blood sugars is going to be significantly less than, say, mine. And I'm 45, so I'm definitely in the stages of perimenopause. And my glucose tolerance, so my ability to clear glucose is going to be significantly less than a 15-year-old boy who's very active all day and his body's like whipping through that glucose. So there's an element of a personal, your activity levels, your own personal glucose tolerance, but there's also an element of predictability. So if we are constantly spiking our blood sugars, we're constantly eating foods that send our blood sugars up, up, up. And this is why a huge proportion of, the figure I heard from America was 80% of Americans have insulin resistance.
80%.
Wow.
80.
That is
crazy.
crazy.
And it's driving the obesity epidemic. It's driving chronic illness. It's when you're insulin resistant, you get high blood pressure. It's one of the signs of insulin resistance is your blood pressure starting to go up. That's because insulin levels stay high, and when insulin's high, it causes something called vasorestriction. So your blood vessels tighten up and your blood pressure goes up. So when we're eating very normalized food that we would associate with everyday life, like cereals and porridge, toast, sandwiches and pasta, baguettes, paninis, rice and vegetables and meat, things that we sort of associate with everyday life. These are foods that have a high carbohydrate content. They are going to spike your blood sugars. Now, when we think back again to our hunter-gatherer days, we would have been roaming looking for food. We might have come across a lovely animal that we could live off for a week or so, and then we would have had to go off roaming again. So we would have found berries for carbohydrates, maybe some root vegetables, a lot of meat, a lot of fatty, rich meat and fish. But we definitely wouldn't have sat down and had a bowl of pasta and a bowl of porridge around our campfire. And these foods, whilst they're really delicious and they light up our brain and our brain loves them, they are definitely having an impact on our metabolic health, i.e. this blood sugar situation. And you asked about putting foods together. There's definitely variety in the impact of these foods when we pair them. So if you mentioned an egg has very little impact on our blood sugars. So fats have no impact on our blood sugar. You can eat a tablespoon of tallow or beef fat and it's not going to do anything to your blood sugar. If you ate a piece of toast, wholemeal or white toast, it's going to go up, up, and up. If you put butter on it, it'll come down a little bit. If you put a big dollop of sauerkraut with it, it will come down even more because the vegetables and fiber really help bring down blood sugars. So a really nice kind of rule of thumb is fresh fiber first. So if you're going out for pizza, for example, and you want to minimize the blood sugar spike, have a big bowl of side salad and maybe have that first.
Yeah.
So that it really helps. That fiber is going to bind and bring down those high sugar spikes from wheat, because wheat really spikes your blood sugar. So fresh fiber first, oils, olive oil drizzled on your pizza or olive oil drizzled on your rice, for example, is going to, again, bring down the impact of the blood sugar. Protein as well. So having fish with your rice or beans with your rice, again, that's going to help bring down the blood sugar impact of those higher carb foods. So it's not that carbs are bad. I'm not demonizing carbohydrates. What I'm saying is we want to be conscious of our carbs and we want to be conscious of the impact they have on our own blood sugars. And you know because after you've eaten them, you feel like, oh, I feel good after that. And then an hour later, you might be, I need to sleep.
Yeah, so
I'm exhausted and I need more sugar or coffee or something to get me going again. And that's the impact of that roller coaster. So as our blood sugars go up, 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 the pancreas is like, oh my gosh, I have to produce insulin to get these down. And then you get this big drop because you've had a big spike. Then the pancreas is like, oh gosh, now I have to produce glucagon, another hormone, to try and bring my blood sugars back up again. And so the poor pancreas is constantly working to try and get us out of these red zones when really we just want this nice low and slow, quite flat blood sugar variation, which is ideal for our brain. It's ideal for our energy. It's ideal for our hormone health. And it's certainly ideal for the poor pancreas that works incredibly hard.
Yeah. I mean, listening to you kind of explain that has made me think about what you were saying about us becoming disconnected with our food, in that when you were saying, you know, maybe start with fresh vegetables, something with fiber in it, and then move on to, you know, some meat or protein and fats, and then you have dessert. And it's kind of what we used to do anyway. We used to have vegetable starter or a salad, and then it move on to our main, and then we would have a dessert at the end, something sweet, and then you'd go for a walk. And we don't do that anymore. It's like fast food and takeaways and vegging in front of the sofa and eating popcorn, and it's just, we've completely disconnected with how we used to eat, which seemed like it was a lot more intuitive and a lot more connected with,
which kind of says more about us societally than anything else, really, because like you say, convenience is king.
Yeah. And I think it's because we're so exhausted and because we crave the comfort. Remember that neuroassociation we get with dopamine is powerful. So even the thought of, I can't wait to get home, get on the sofa, open my bag of ... like chill out, get the remote out. The brain is already like anticipating that reward it's going to get. But what's interesting is if we reward it in another way, like you mentioned, Sophie, going for a walk. Actually, going for a walk is such a powerful way to blunt your blood sugars after you've eaten. So I write quite a few articles this time of year around Christmas and, you know, how to sort of try and mitigate against that big meal we have at Christmas. And going for a walk after you've had your giant Sunday lunch, which we all accept, like, I'm just going to eat until I feel so full that I have to undo all my buttons. And actually, if we fill up on vegetables, because let's be honest, there's loads of delicious vegetables on offer at Christmas. Brussels sprouts with bacon and carrots and lovely swede and all the lovely mashes.
Red cabbage,
roast potatoes. Yum.
We love it, don't we, at Christmas?
So good.
But every other day of the year, it's like, vegetables.
Sprouts.
No, yuck.
We like sprouts.
Yeah, because I was at I was in the States the other day, and they have in Whole Foods, they have like the food counter. And it's great. I love it. Every time I go to America, I'm straight to the Whole Foods food counter. But it's like piles of Brussels sprouts, you know, and they're all like cooked in really nice, sort of, you know, seasoned really nicely and roasted and stuff. And everyone was loving it. I was like, oh, okay. You wouldn't get that in England, would you? Anytime other than Christmas.
If you season veg, like salt, I love salt on my vegetables.
Asparagus and broccoli, love it.
And some ghee or butter. Like butter to me is life. I love butter.
Yeah.
So just putting some seasoning on your vegetables makes a big, big difference.
Well, and again, maybe that's sometimes the thing is like actually being bothered to cook, or not necessarily being bothered, but to like, again, being in tune with your food is part of it, is also preparing that food.
Yeah.
I would say one of the easiest ways to unprocess your diet is to use your freezer. Now, I don't even mean batch cooking, which if you're into, I mean, well done you, that's great. I don't even have time. I could make time, but I don't batch cook. But what I do is use my freezer, and I have just a wealth of vegetables in my freezer. There's great brands out there now, like Packed, which is an organic brand that's made, they have paper packaging, and they do organic edamame beans and petit pois, and they do chopped organic strawberries, so they're already in the little cubes, so you don't have these giant frozen whole strawberries. They do incredible organic cauli rice, which I use probably 4 times a week, actually.
Oh, nice.
So when you're really thinking, I just can't be bothered to cook, which is, let's be honest, most of us. I'm definitely in that camp. I've got kids to feed as well as myself to feed, and they definitely don't want an egg cauli-fried rice meal in the evening. So quite often I'm finding myself trying to adapt our meals to suit everyone. But I will get a bag of cauli rice, frozen cauli rice, out the freezer, put a big knob of butter in my pan. In it goes some edamame beans, some chopped French beans. Let it sit there for 5-10 minutes sauteing, and then a nice dollop of really good quality olive oil pesto, and the meal's done. And I can probably cook that quicker than it would take to choose a takeaway. But it's having those empowering alternatives that are short, quick, easy, that your brain's like, actually, I can manage that. And you could stir in an egg to, you know, put more protein into it. So it's like an egg cauli-fried rice. The freezer can be such a help when it comes, and cupboards. You know, we're not shunning processed food, because we all want pasta sauces in jars and, you know, things that are in our freezer that are convenient. It's the ultra processed that are full of things that are damaging to our gut and that are damaging to our mental health, because they are driving us to want more of that because of the MSG and the addictive compounds in there that we don't even realize are tapping into this system, making us go, I just can't stay away from that. I need more of it.
How can you find out what is the ultra processed worse alternative? If, for example, you're talking about a pasta sauce, for example, are there any ways that you can like look on the back and see, oh, it's got that in it, so I shouldn't eat that? Or
sugar's normally a big indicator.
Yeah. And because sugar's hidden in everything.
Yeah.
Because of its impact on our brain. They don't put sugar in pasta sauce to make it sweeter. They put it in there to...
Well, you know, when you make a pasta sauce, you don't need to put sugar in it.
You don't.
Yeah.
And the
Maybe
same with bread,
not even a pinch.
ketchup.
Salt, yes, but not sugar.
I mean, they put sugar in everything because of its impact on our brain health. So I would say read the label, and it can be challenging because sometimes you look at things, you're like, what? I don't even know what that means. And that's a good indicator.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, that the higher quality foods do tend to be more expensive because they'll use olive oil, they'll use organic tomatoes, they'll use organic basil, they'll use the nice ingredients. But I'm such a big advocate for quality over quantity. We don't need as much of the food that we think we need. But if we're supporting fair trade chocolate and really well-sourced ingredients produced by fairly traded farming practices, really transparent supply chains, we're adding to the solution. We're not adding to the problem, because, you know, really how we spend our money is a form of activism.
Yeah.
And so I am very conscious, you know, especially owning a health food shop, I have to be really aware of the products I'm selecting, because I'm advocating for them. I'm saying this is a great brand to purchase. So I have learned a huge amount over the last 7 years about the broken food system, the broken cacao industry, the coconut industry, all of these really poor practices that happen. And not only are they bad for the environment, they're really bad for our health. So when I think about what I want to feed my children and what I want to feed myself and my family, I really just think about food as being this amazing medicinal substance. And I'm thinking about, I'm buying less of it. I'm not filling a trolley full of junk. I'm going, no, I'm going to treat myself to a really delicious pesto. And my kids eat pasta, but I go for there's a brand called Crosta Molica, which is an Italian brand, and it's really nice quality wheat. It is a wheat product, but it's a really high quality wheat. It's not heavily sprayed with glyphosate, and it's not the industrial type that you'll find in many pastas. So it's a form of insurance. I see food as a form of insurance to support our short-term and our long-term health.
It really is. It is a mindset shift, and I speak from experience because, you know, I grew up normal working class family, not really much nutritional understanding or education, to be honest with you, and had a terrible diet growing up, and just filled myself with sweets and junk food, and then into my teens, and then it wasn't until I was sort of in my early 20s that I became a little bit more aware of health stuff. And then in the last maybe sort of like 5 years, I've really had to work at it, but it has been a mindset shift to now when I've completely changed where I buy my food from. I buy all my main groceries from Riverford, which is like organic farm, and thank you, Pauline approves. She's got the stamp of approval.
If they want to sponsor the podcast.
I know, I've been trying to get them to sponsor the podcast because I bring them up in like every episode, and I tell all my friends about them, and I think more people should be trying to use companies like Riverford because they're just doing amazing things. I
100% agree.
And the food is so good. It's so much better than all of the other sort of meal kit options you get. Because Riverford, for people that don't know, they provide meal kits, so you can get the recipes sort of all, you know, measured out for you, and you just make it. But you can also buy, you know, milk and bread and butter and cashew milk and all these meats and stuff as well from them. So, and it is more expensive, but I actually weirdly don't spend more money because I buy less stuff, because I eat everything. I don't waste anything. I need less. You know, my whole life has been a struggle to put weight on, and I've been constantly like shoving food in me to try and put weight on. But with this, I don't need to, because I'm getting all the nutrients and enough fat and enough protein. And so, and I do spend less, and then anything else I just top up at the health food shop, like dark chocolate and nuts and stuff like that. And that sees me through, and it's been an absolute game changer. And now I enjoy it. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy food. I enjoy going to the health food shop, and it's not this like depressing, like trudging through the supermarket, like bumping into people. You actually, you know, it's such a game changer, honestly.
I couldn't agree with you more. And not only are you getting a much better quality experience with Riverford, because when foods are sprayed, for example, there's been umpteen studies by likely government funded saying there's no difference between organic and non-organic when it comes to vitamins and minerals. What they don't talk about is polyphenols. So these are the little chemical compounds that you find in, say, blueberries that make them bright purple. They're called anthocyanins in blueberries. And when you spray a crop with a fungicide, that polyphenol in that berry is not there for our benefit. It's there for the berry's benefit. It's its own survival, its own protection. So it's there to protect itself against fungal infection. So when that berry is sprayed with a fungicide, it doesn't have to produce polyphenols to the same level. And so you get these polyphenol poor, these blueberries that just don't have anywhere close to the punch that you get when you buy organic peppers and blueberries and kale and spinach. So the nutritional value from what you're getting from your organic box is incredible, but you're also supporting the organic farmers. And that is another just fundamental point of the link between our human health and our planetary health.
So true. And it's also, I mean, I've noticed one of the things I said when I first started getting Riverford was I was like, oh my God, the food actually looks like food. You know, you're getting apples that are all like weird looking, and because we're used to these like perfect ruby red apples in the supermarket that look like they were like made in a laboratory. And you've also got you're getting better soil quality and all of that. I mean, like a lot of people when I started buying Riverford, or not even Riverford, I've gone to various different organic places, and I have heard that before. Lots of people like, there's no difference, it's the same as, just get the normal supermarket stuff. It's the same as the organic stuff you get in there as well. And yeah, it's not, is it?
There are multiple differences, not just, as I mentioned, the health aspect, but, the supermarkets squeeze the farmers so badly. And they're a big part of the food problem issue that we're seeing at the moment.
It's all seasonal. Yeah. Which is what I love, because, there'll be asparagus season. And I'm like, oh, I love asparagus. And then it comes out of season, they stop selling it. And I'm like, no, where's my asparagus? And something else will come in.
Well, it's not been imported from somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we do, as humans, we've become so accustomed to having
strawberries
all year round and pineapples and stuff like that, and food that shouldn't be available to us. And now I don't know from a nutritional standpoint how that impacts us, but I do know that shopping in local farms and places like Riverford has been a game changer for me, just reconnecting with food and getting to know. I probably wouldn't have even been able to tell you when asparagus was in season before, to be honest with you. I don't think
many people would, really.
Yeah. Why would you think about it?
But I love that you've mentioned reconnecting with food, because I think that's when food becomes a pleasure, as opposed to that love-hate relationship we can have with food. Instead, it becomes this curious experiences. Oh, what am I going to do with this? Right. I've never had a kumquat before. What am I going to do with that?
Custard apples.
I've written it down.
See, custard apples.
But I've also drawn a picture of a poo, because I really didn't like the custard. Yeah, they weren't great.
Because I got custard apples one week, and I'd never had them before. And again, I've been getting like dragon fruit.
As soon as you mentioned Riverford, I put custard apples down.
Yeah. Neural association. So I was like, I know who might eat it. Eli, because he eats a lot.
He loves all fruits.
He's a teenager.
But he wasn't so keen on the custard
So I gave them the custard apple.
Donut
a family
peaches
joke.
might like.
Donut peaches.
My son loves donut peaches.
And
he loves
white
peaches.
White kiwis? No, maybe not white kiwis.
He will eat any
kiwis.
fruit, but the custard apple was he wasn't
honestly,
so keen on.
I've become more food literate honestly,
Yes, I
from
love
shopping
that.
like that. I love it. And I
Yeah.
feel happier and healthier. And when I cook dinner, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a natural cook. And when it comes to cooking, I still do have those days where I'm like, oh God, I really can't be bothered. But sometimes I get this wave of I guess it could be dopamine. I don't know what it is, but I get this wave of excitement, and I'm like in the kitchen and I put some music on and I'm cooking and I feel like a chef.
Well, I like
that.
cooking, and I get what you're saying. Like, actually reconnecting with food is that, like, if you are into cooking, then like it's sometimes hard to understand when people aren't connected to food, because you think, well, you know, because obviously if it's something you're into.
Yeah, cooking's a bit of an art and a bit of a
Yeah,
meditation.
yeah, and yeah, it is. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, I mean, same with Michelle, my wife. She loves cooking because it's that chance to just switch off. And do that practice, and then you do have that connection with the food.
Just going back to sort of mental health, general health, chronic illness and stuff like that. If for the listeners, they think, you know, not 100% sure how much their diets are really impacting them, what are some kind of things they can look out for, some signs that they can kind of tick off that they're doing something that maybe needs to be improved?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there are so many variables that impact our mental health, from really poor sleep, for example, which then impacts how we feel when we wake up in the morning, which then impacts what we go to grab in the morning to give us a bit of a pep, a bit of a boost. So I would say looking at your daily routine and noting, how do you feel first thing in the morning? Are you waking up going, oh, I feel awful, I need something to just get me going through the day? That's normalized, but it's not normal.
Interesting.
So that's why I generally start a client's journey when I'm working with someone with their sleep. Because if we're not sleeping well, it's the cornerstone of health. It doesn't matter what we're doing, eating and how we're living. If we don't sleep well, we're just not going to wake up with that sense of bring on the day. I'm ready for it. I'm excited for the day. So a good night's sleep, ironically, starts in the morning. So we want to be looking at, you know, getting daylight in our eyes first thing. Okay. That in itself is going to have a really positive impact on your mood. It naturally boosts dopamine when you go outside and let the light in. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy, raining, snowy, you will still get that really beautiful boost of dopamine and have the calming effect. The amygdala, which is our fear center in the brain, is really soothed when we go outside in the morning and just have a little walk around.
And just to clarify, it has to be direct sunlight and not through a window.
You will get some benefit if you're by a window. So let's say you're just not able to get outside. If you sit by a window, you're still going to get some of the benefit. Okay. But in an ideal world, you'd be outside. And in an ideal world, you'd be walking or jogging, just forward movement. It's even cycling. But being on a train doesn't have that same impact on the brain, the same forward motion. Yeah. Sunglasses, interestingly, reduce the impact of this.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're going for a walk in the morning, you're wearing sunglasses, you're going to have much less of that benefit of getting the light into your eyes and anchoring you into the circadian rhythm. So our body produces certain hormones at certain times of the day. This is to help us feel awake and alert and then calm and relaxed as the day goes on. So we want a little cortisol boost in the morning. We want our dopamine levels to go up. And as the evening comes about, we want melatonin to be increasing, our sleep hormone, and we want cortisol to be going way down, preparing us for sleep. A lot of people wake up and their cortisol's way down here. And then as the day goes on, cortisol spikes in the evening. So it's like a complete opposite to what we're looking for. So when we start thinking about our daily routine and we get out in the morning and get daylight into our eyes and just even having a 5-10 minute walk, park a bit further away from work or get a dog.
Yeah, I was going to say,
a dog will get you out for sure.
She gets me up every morning.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, it's so true, isn't it? So getting out every morning, and the more you do it, the more you start thinking, oh, this actually feels really good. I like this. I'm hearing the birds tweeting even though it's pitch black. I'm enjoying this time to myself. It starts to become something that initially is a bit painful, but after time, you're like, no, that time is really special for me now. Then as the day goes on, you know, we're making really good choices. There's this really interesting phenomenon called decision fatigue. So decision fatigue happens at the end of the day. So all your good decisions are made generally during the day. You might start off the day really well. I'm eating salad and protein and I'm being really, really good in the day. And then you get to the evening and you're like, I can't make any more decisions. I'm just going to go for the Maltesers and the beer and the wine or whatever it is we go for, because our brain doesn't like to make loads of decisions throughout the day and then have to make loads of decisions at night. So the more you pre-plan and get into routine, the more you're likely to stick to great habits in the evening, which is when we tend to go off a little bit. So pre-planning or just having your kind of routine. I'm really boring. I like to exercise the same way every week. I like to go to my certain strength training classes. I like to do my PT on a certain day. I'm really predictable, because then my brain is way better at making decisions that are important and that are going to be impactful on other areas of my life. So boring is good for me, and I'm all for boring. Then I get to my lunch, have a big, really healthy, plentiful lunch, lots of protein, color, fermented foods. Then, but when you come to the evening, you do not want to be eating really late before you go to bed. That is going to impact your sleep and your mental health, because when you eat a big meal, your blood sugar is inevitably going to go up, particularly if it's a really like heavy, carby, rich food. And you might have some beer or alcohol with it as well. Your blood sugars are just going to go up, up, and up. Now, the thing that our body wants most before it goes to sleep is a drop in its core body temperature. What food does is it rises your core body temperature. So you start getting this internal heating being stoked just at a time when your body's like, no, I want it to drop. So for women going through perimenopause and entering that kind of hot flush stage, this is really important, because they might be going to bed getting night sweats and hot flushes already, and they're eating late at night. So their body temperature is already out of sync a little. So having that 3-hour gap before you go to bed of not eating or snacking or indulging in, alcohol, anything that's going to spike the blood sugars, that really helps to set the scene for a good night's sleep. Magnesium is obviously really helpful for sleep as well. It calms the nervous system. It gets you into that deep REM sleep. And I would definitely recommend, if someone is struggling with sleep, try a good magnesium, a biglycinate or a glycinate. That really, research shows that particular compound is the best one to get you into deep sleep. And a lot of people struggle with sleep. And it's really hard to make great choices when you haven't slept well.
We were talking about that this morning, weren't we? It just seems so common now. People were texting me all over the place like, oh, I woke up at 3:30 this morning and I just stayed awake because I couldn't get back to sleep and stuff like that.
But again, going back to our earlier point of being on all the time, we're on all the time. We've got, we're overly stimulated.
Totally.
And so
blue light at night before bed. And that 3 a.m. wake up is really indicative of blood sugar issues.
It's funny because I think I've said this to her before. I'll get her to message you because this is a regular thing, and she's like terrible with her sleep. But yeah, it's that. So if you're struggling with sleep, or if you're waking up in the middle of the night, that's a good indicator that your sugar spikes are going up and down.
So what happens is your blood sugar's going up, 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 up as you're going to bed, you're trying to fall asleep, and then about 3 a.m. in the morning, as you're getting that big drop in blood sugars, because your pancreas has been producing insulin, bring this big sugar spike down, boom, you become hypoglycemic, so low blood sugar. That the body sees as a bit of a panic. So it wakes you up and you're like, why am I wide awake? And it's because your blood sugars have dropped really low.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. So we've got poor sleep, obviously then tiredness and fatigue, foul mood, anxiety, depression, stuff
mood
like
is an interesting one, I would say, because the different brain hormones, serotonin, dopamine, that you can have low dopamine, for example, or it will leave you feeling quite low in motivation. It'll leave you feeling quite flat and just not really having much joie de vivre. You're kind of just like, ugh, whatever. Just can't be bothered to do anything. Low serotonin can make you feel really emotional. So you're crying a lot. You cry very easily. You're just feeling very fragile. And you can have both. But those two neurotransmitters, those two brain hormones, they have those different functions. And you can start to pick out maybe where you could be low in one or the other or both, depending on how you're feeling. And you could feel differently during the month. You could be, serotonin is a really, really important hormone. It's like you're singing in the shower hormone. It makes you feel alive. It makes you feel good. But it has this predictable pathway. And you need, again, protein, amino acids to build the next product along, which is called 5-HTP, which then turns into serotonin. And if you're low in, your building blocks, your protein, you need vitamin D again, you need all these other raw ingredients, let's call them, from lovely nutritious food, magnesium being one of them. So if we're constantly eating high sugar foods, we're pulling down our magnesium reserves, our zinc reserves. So again, this is how it impacts our mental well-being. So if your serotonin is low, it makes you feel overly emotional and just not very joyous. Serotonin converts into melatonin, our sleep hormone. So then you're starting to find your sleep is really poor. Serotonin converting into melatonin requires zinc. And zinc is found in seafood and meat, pumpkin seeds. So if you're not eating those zinc-rich foods, and if you're eating really high sugar foods, which is depleting you of zinc, you can start to see the link where you're low in serotonin, you're then low in melatonin, you're having poor sleep, you're going for the sugary foods to get you going. It's increasing inflammation, it's reducing your dopamine, it's reducing your serotonin. You need things that stimulate those brain hormones. And it's kind of like, okay, I need a reset. I need to stop. I need to really think about simple steps to get me started again. I'm going to start by just going for a walk in the morning or getting some daylight exposure. And I'm going to introduce more eggs and protein-rich foods into my diet to give my brain hormones the building blocks they need. And I want to get better sleep. And maybe magnesium helps with that. Omegas, so essential fatty acids, are exactly that. They're essential for our brain health. Very, very important for mental well-being. In fact, in research, they've been put toe-to-toe with SSRIs and various other antidepressants, and omega-3 fatty acids perform equally as well in elevating our mood, likely because of their anti-inflammatory effect, and that impacts our serotonin and dopamine, but also because of the absolute need of the brain for these important fats. So looking at these kind of ingredients as being fundamental to our functioning, and not just I've heard omegas are good for me, but they're not for me. Dismissing them as they're not going to make a difference. When we start piecing all these small elements together, then we start to create an environment for the brain to start to feel happy and settled again.
God, everything is so connected. That's one huge takeaway, I think, that not just from this episode, but just from talking to you previously, and you've explained various different things to me as well in terms of hormone health. And it's like, I don't think many people, myself included, really realize how connected everything is. Like you need zinc to do this, and in order for that, you need this vitamin, and you need omegas to do that. And I think some people are just kind of like, well, as long as I eat a bit of fruit and vegetables and some eggs here and there, then I'm sure it will all be fine.
Have a 5 a day.
Yeah, exactly. We have all these sort of phrases like have a 5 a day or an apple a day keeps the doctor away and stuff like that. And I think it can be quite, quite confusing for people to know, like, what do I need to eat? Where do I start? Especially if you're at the point where you are in complete, chaos with your diet, and you're overworked and overwhelmed and don't have the money to be splashing out on all this expensive food and stuff. It can feel like, where do I even start?
I completely agree. And that overwhelm is almost like it paralyzes you in moving forward. You're like, well, I'm just doing nothing then.
Exactly.
And so what I say to anyone in that situation is, look at the easy wins, look at the low-hanging fruit. Eggs are really affordable. And they are a powerhouse of nutrition. The only nutrient you won't get from an egg is vitamin C.
Really?
So you'll get a whole range of amazing, even iron you'll get in eggs. Wow. Now, one egg is not going to give you enough iron for the day, but if you had 4 eggs, it would.
And there's so much you can do with eggs as well.
You can make omelets, frittatas, you can make scrambled eggs, boiled eggs, poached eggs. Eggs are just amazing. I love eggs, and they're affordable. They're the one food that we can still make a really good meal out of without it costing a huge amount of money. So I'd say look at eggs and sauerkraut. That's another really affordable food that is rich in vitamin C. And it's really great for your gut health. So all of a sudden, you've got quite a complete food already. You've got your eggs, protein, all those nutrients, sauerkraut for your vitamin C, the one nutrient you won't get from your eggs. And then you can start looking at maybe a bit of Greek yogurt and some berries. These are quite simple and affordable foods. And if you just start simplifying, look at your shopping list as, how do I make this the most basic? Cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, berries, whatever cut of meat I can get. Go to the meat counter, go to your butcher, see what offcuts they have, see what they're reducing. Get the meat cuts that not many people want, get the meat on the bone, get a slow cooker, make stews, stick a bit of apple cider vinegar in there to draw all the goodness out of the bone. Let that stew feed you for 2 or 3 days and stick in some really great veg in there as well. I know being healthy can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be.
Plus,
it can be done.
Being sick is more expensive.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And ironically, when we're not in that good headspace, we tend to find we buy things to try and make us feel better. Impulsive buying, junk food buying, spending to give us the dopamine hit, but it's so short-lived. And then we're just stuck in this cycle.
Yeah.
So it might take a bit of planning out, or it might be that you're not someone who likes to plan, but just, you know, get your eggs and a bit of meat and some yogurt and cottage cheese. Get these really good foods into your fridge and start experimenting and seeing what floats your boat, see what you like. I love just cottage cheese with some chopped up apple in it. It's a really good, easy to eat fast food when you're like, I am hungry and I need something to eat whilst my steak is cooking, you know, because sometimes you're so hungry and you don't want to go to a packet of crisps, or you don't want to graze on something else. But if you've got a bit of cottage cheese with some chopped apple salad that you've just made before while you're making your steak, perfect. So think about simplifying. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's all about seeing food as medicine, seeing it as part of, you know, your journey to really great health, and know that on the other side, you're going to feel so much better.
Oh, thank you, Pauline. That's been so helpful. Yeah, I think people are listening. I hope will feel inspired to do something, because I really do appreciate from firsthand experience how paralyzing it can be to have some kind of unhealthy habits that need shifting. It is hard to change, but so important, and it's so rewarding as well when you get to the other side of it. So yeah, really grateful for you coming on and chatting to us and giving us your time. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys.